Lou Martin here with my buddy Adam Wyeth. Adam is a very bright light, and we ran into each other in Dublin at the beginning of the year and had a great catch up. And Adam is a playwright and a poet, and he is well lauded in Ireland, and he's from England originally. He has a great awakening story. I read your blog about traveling in Africa, I think it was,
yeah,
and meeting your partner and becoming a writer. Do you want to tell us some of that, and then we can take on the topics of the day? How does that sound?
Tell you what, about me in Africa?
Well, yes. If you know, for people who don't know you and want to get into, I want to introduce my group to you and share your wisdom. We'll chop off the nasty bits at the beginning of this, hopefully,
Okay.
and we'll make something out of it. So yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing and all of that.
Well, yeah, as you said, I live in Ireland, in Dublin, and I write poetry and plays, mostly, and essays. I've got 4 books published with Salmon Poetry, 2 poetry collections, a book of essays called The Hidden World of Poetry, Unraveling Celtic Mythology and Contemporary Irish Poetry, which is about how contemporary Irish poets refer to Celtic mythology, and Irish folklore in their work. And it's trying to give a very contemporary slant on ancient myth, and I'm really interested in ancient myth and symbolism, and the last few years particularly really interested in psychology, particularly Jung, and I'm reading a lot of James Hillman at the moment, very interested in the anima. We talk a lot about the shadow, but the anima I think is a fascinating thing. I find it really interesting actually that, sorry, I'm going off topic here, I'm not talking, is that all right?
No, you're fine. No, you're
okay. No, I find it really interesting that we, this sort of, kind of at the time we're talking a lot about gender fluidity and things, and actually when you look at Jung and the ancients, they're well ahead of us, so there's nothing new in that sense. And you probably know yourself that, I've seen things, I don't know how true this is, but I read it quite a lot on Facebook and things about Native Americans having several genders, so
sure.
There'll be a man, if you're very masculine, or a man-woman, or a man-woman, all this sort of thing. So it's, yes. I think, the problems we're having with gender fluidity say more about us as a modern, we think we're becoming more progressive as we evolve, but it might be that we've become more puritanical. But anyway, so I'm fascinated by mythology and psychology and poetry, which I all think are sort of the same thing. Joseph Campbell said, that mythology is poetry, and also, of course, mythology is the psychology of the ancients. All these things sort of intermingle. So that's, I suppose, one of my preoccupations. So yeah, and I'm from England originally. And I've lived here for 20 years, so it's half of my life.
Right.
Probably in the process now. I was in Brexit denial until recently, and
Weren't we all?
yeah,
Weren't we all?
and
Yes.
so I will be officially an Irish citizen, I'm sure soon, and I've always seen myself as a citizen of the planet and of the world, but people like Theresa May tell us otherwise, that we're citizens of nowhere. But I don't mind being nowhere, really. It suits me fine as a poet.
Okay, all right. Well, that's a lovely. That's Jung and Hillman and Celtic mythology and gender, identity and all of that stuff is very great. Those are fantastic topics to talk about, and of course we've gotten into politics and all that, and I think both of us share a little kind of a fascination of how the unconscious archetypes and the light and the dark, the shadow and the light, etc., play themselves out in the big world. Adam, you're a very deep thinker. I like to think I'm one of those as well. So how we kind of try to fit, this rich human history of mythology, poetry, psychology into, creating more meaningful lives, more authentic lives, more fulfilling lives. Can you talk about, as a playwright and poet, how you strive to bring your vision out into the world in a way that shapes people, informs people, empowers people in terms of having a more conscious reality? Is that a good topic?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny actually, because one of the things I've realized with my creative writing is actually to be as non-topical and non-didactic as possible. Because I think one of the problems with art at the moment, and I think it's very interesting actually, that with this sort of very energetic kind of left and right wing politics that's kind of happening at the moment, in some ways you're seeing the left and right being as bad as each other. And that's probably to do with capitalism and things. And I think a narcissistic culture. And I think the left, or the neoliberal left at least, have a lot to answer themselves, as much as, you know, the Trump supporters or the far right or you know, more conservative, you know, thinkers. And so with my work in a way is, I guess, is a response to that. But with something I found in the last few years, particularly since I've been playwriting, it's kind of opened up my poetic channel, if you like. And it's become really delving deeper into the subconscious, you know. And I think obviously when you're doing creative work, you're always in that subconscious realm. It's interesting that you channel mediums and voices or whatever, because Paul Muldoon, the Irish poet, talks about that writing poetry is very much opening yourself up to be a channel and to receive, you know, and that sort of thing. And that's what, like, a lot of my writing now comes out of this. I have a Word document on my computer, and it's called Speed Writing, Write Rubbish. And it's a document where I'm allowed just to empty my mind, or whatever kind of, it's like stream of consciousness writing. And it's wonderful. And a lot of my ideas and work comes from that, because it takes the pressure off. So rather than going, oh, I'm going to write about a certain myth or a certain political idea or a certain, I actually forget that completely and go into this world that I don't know at all. And it's almost like, it's like working backwards. So it's like I vomit onto the paper, almost, you know, just whatever it is coming through. And it's also with, I mean, because it's poetry as well. So it's all about, it's like you're jamming. Oh, and I've started doing it on the keyboard now as well. So it's like you're almost just tapping, you know, and then afterwards reading over it and think, what is this lunatic saying? You know, and trying to make sense. Sometimes I describe it, it's like throwing all my toys out of the cart and then trying to assemble them into some semblance of order. And so that's my that's my creative process. And in a way, by doing that, that has become something political, because actually art at the moment is so prescriptive. Everything is so, that there's so much, like if you look at what's going on in the theatre world and the publishing world, everything has to have a sort of political agenda, a political bent. And it might be and there's very good reason for that. And I'm completely for more diversity in the arts, and you know, and all those things I think are very much needed, you know, both with race and gender, you know, and everything else.
But you're talking about stylistic freedom and exploring the unconscious and being a channel for that. You know,
art is about the imagination as well, you know, and that's what, for me, that's become almost something that we're losing at the moment in the arts.
I mean, yes, being a visionary is one of my, you know, favorite, you know, callings for anyone, because we need that clear channel into things that we don't understand.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I mean, Rilke, a great German poet, says the future enters into us long before it happens. And I think that's what you do as an artist. You start to channel that and open up those ideas. And you can't be doing that if you're being prescriptive. If Adam Wyeth has a certain political agenda, it's very hard to do that. And I think you're opening yourself up to the collective unconscious, ancestors, whatever you want to call it. You're opening yourself up, and the funny thing is, by doing that, you will be political, you will be pertinent to the time, because you are alive now. And it always interests me when you take a writer like Samuel Beckett, one of my favourite writers, extraordinary modernist writer. You look at someone like him, look at his life, how he lived through, you know, some of the terrible times in Ireland historically, and then of course through World War II, where he was in the resistance, and interestingly enough, he preferred Paris at war to a neutral island. So there's a lot about Ireland at the time. But if you look at his
Well,
work,
Samuel liked a bit of drama, as we know. So
but if you look at Samuel Beckett's work, he never talks about the war. He never talks about his time in the resistance, and yet the aesthetic of his work is all about the fragmentary consciousness, the what happened, the effects of war come out in his work all the time. But it's universal, and it's there in a much more alive way, and in a way that I think will stay alive a lot longer than if he said, "Oh, I'm, Waiting for Godot is about two guys after World War II," or set it in some particular place. Instead, he sets it in this dream world, or in this non-world, or in this whatever it is, And he leaves that poetic image alive, and I think. And yet it speaks for the time. Everyone got it because he was alive and lived through that, and so that's kind of one of my things, I guess. That I
okay, that's great. That's great. I mean, again, brother, I could chat here all day with you about all this. Camus, of course, he springs to mind as another great, writer who was shaped by those experiences. And I mean, I honestly, I've been thinking of his novel *The Plague* recently. I don't know if you read that one, but yeah, that's
more commercial. Yeah.
Well, sadly it's become very timely with the topics of the day. But and you're a musician. You play the tablas as well as the keyboards and all that. And you bring to mind for me Henry Miller, who was a big Stream of Consciousness fan, and is one of my favorites, and also Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, who this Qawwali singer, voice,
amazing. I love Sufism.
Right? Yeah. Well, I got to see him in concert. It was a real joy. And did you? Yeah, and so the guy sits behind him and he whispers possible lyrical ideas into him while he's singing.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a great a great freedom in that stream of consciousness, and then
Rumi.
Rumi as well.
With him, the whirling and reciting this poetry, becoming this channel, and then people writing down, and now well, he's a best-selling. I think isn't he the best-selling poet in America
of all time? Of all time. Yeah, but tell me about that. That's what he did. He would be doing the whirling dervish and chanting poetry.
Yeah, so he invented that. Rumi invented, this dervish thing of spinning around. And in fact, I've just finished my latest book, which is called About Blank, which is actually my most ambitious and most experimental piece I've done, and it's this.
I love the title. I love the title.
Great. And it's actually, the About Blank is what comes up on the computer sometimes when you have a slow page. So it's this big sprawling kind of poetry piece, and it's kind of got lyrical poetry. Now it follows a narrative, so there is a storyline, but it's very fragmentary. And it's not. I was trying to break something else. I'm interested in writing as well. Is trying to break this logical linearity of plots, and trying to find a more mythic method. And that's a term which T.S. Eliot used to describe what James Joyce was doing with Ulysses. So Ulysses taking a life in the day, but applying the Odyssey to this. So I've kind of done that, and using various myths and various kind of psychological sort of ideas. So it's more that it's threaded through symbol than through a linear plot. That's how you have to. And again, I think it's what I suppose if there is something political I'm trying to do as well is awaken our senses to the symbol again, to metaphor. Peter Hall said the best plays have a poetical shape or a metaphorical shape. So the play as metaphor, the story is metaphor, and that's really important to me. But the last poem in the collection, anyway, is called "The Great Friend," and it's about Rumi, and it's a true story. It's a little narrative poem, but the story.
Read it.
Yeah, I can if you like. Shall I read it?
Oh, we'd love that. Sure.
Okay. Let me just get it. So it kind of speaks for it kind of speaks for itself then.
Well, you can set it up as well. We enjoy both.
Find it.
Sure. I did I tell you I saw Peter Hall's production of *Midsummer Night's Dream*? That was
wow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that was a thrill.
Yeah.
Where
did you see that?
In the 70s in Los Angeles.
Wow. Amazing. Yeah. I've never seen a Peter Hall production. I'm a huge fan of his. He was probably one of the writers that's means the most to me is Harold Pinter, and you know,
Yes.
Peter Hall was the great director for
No, I did not
Harold Pinter.
know that about
Yeah,
him.
we
No.
probably. I wonder would Harold Pinter even be as big as he was if it wasn't for someone like Peter Hall, because Peter Hall was the director. He founded the Royal Shakespeare Company, and so he directed a lot of Pinter's plays, you know, including The Homecoming. Is, you know, big hit and by the RSC. But yeah, he's fantastic. Yeah.
Yes.
So anyway, this poem is called The Great Friend, and
Yes.
the true story, and it's one day an older scholar, I can't remember, he was kind of Rumi became Rumi's mentor, but it's about their relationship anyway. So it's called the Great Friend. Can you hear me?
Yes, Shabs Tabriz.
That's it, Shabs. Yeah. So this is about Shabs, and I don't mention any of that, but it's that relationship anyway, which was which transformed Rumi, and then he disappeared, and that also transformed him as well. So this is a true sort of account, if you like, narrative piece of that.
Brilliant.
The Great Friend. In the autumn of 1244, a young Muslim scholar of Konya met a new arrival who'd been travelling throughout the Middle East. This stranger put a question to the scholar, which remains one of the great mysteries. The young scholar lost his breath and fainted. When he came round, the two talked and became locked in a stream of endless dialogue, inseparable. They spoke for days without human need, like two musicians riffing, each one taking over where the other left off, in a state of pure discovery. Late one night, mid-discussion, the friend went to attend a knock at the door and didn't come back. The young scholar fell silent and vowed never to speak again unless his great friend returned. He had fallen into what is known as the deep well of meditation, the narrow tunnel of mortal contemplation. For months, not a word passed his lips. Then, on his darkest night, he looked up and let out a savage howl. As he screamed, he found a new voice forming. The next morning, he headed to the market square and began to speak. Poetry and parables poured out. You are the sky my spirit circles in. My soul is from elsewhere. He started to sway and, outstretching his arms, whirled around, spinning between food stalls, weaving parables out of chickpeas, forming fables about burnt kebabs. A large crowd gathered. Some started to swoon and dissolve into laughter. Others moaned in ecstasy and cried. One young man began writing his every word down. The Konya scholar had lost all simile and became the thing itself, the lover, the beggar, the parched earth, the unfurling flower. He continued turning into the small hours, his great friend returning through him, a mute moon smiling in the wings.
Brilliant.
So that's that.
Brilliant. Beautiful. Thank you. Gorgeous. That's lovely, Adam. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure. Well, thanks for listening.
Yeah.
So that kind of closes the. I've lost sight of you. Anyway, I'll find you. That closes the collection, and like I suppose the book is very much about kind of language and loss and love. You know, those are sort of the sort of three themes that sort of go throughout the work, and I kind of ended on that because I think that has that as well, of the sort of having the voice and then losing his voice and then finding the great friend within him again, and being transformed by this tragedy of love, of losing this great lover in the platonic sense, and then going deep into that depression and then coming out of it is something very interesting, I think.
Well, it is a huge life lesson, and it's as timeless today as it was in Rumi's time. As valuable today and as essential, because isn't it? We all get lost in the world and each other, and it keeps throwing us back deeper into ourselves. And being a student of meditation and channeling and spiritual counseling and these kinds of things, as well as writing music and acting and studying theater and film and all that, we're living in this time of looking for a new language that speaks to, the hearts of people that, as we said earlier, are quite overwhelmed and confused. you know, about what's important and what's valuable, and how to find the truth in their own hearts and how to trust that truth.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's what I would
it's, yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing thing. I mean, I'm discovering things all the time about myself, and even just recently doing sort of keeping dream diaries and things like that. And who is it I've been reading? Is it Johnson? Robert A. Johnson, I think he is.
Okay,
And
yes, she.
who's a Jungian
Yes,
psychologist.
he has a book called She. That's one I know. He has a book called She, S-H-E.
Yes, that's right, and he as well. Yeah, so I think I read he. I don't think I read she. And yeah, and so yeah, and then the dream book he has as well is fascinating, and it's active imagination, which is fascinating. So like, say you have a dream, and in fact recently I was having these dreams where I was very young in the dreams, usually sort of 8 or 10, around that kind of age, sometimes a little older, but always a kid. And I was thinking, why am I, and often in trouble, you know, not in good places, you know, and I was thinking, well, how do I handle these dreams? You know, and you know, you look up the symbolism and that sort of thing, and it doesn't. They can help sometimes with certain things, but you're not really penetrating the dream very much. And the great thing, what active imagination does, is you start communicating with the figure in the dream. So I'd on the computer start a dialogue, and it's amazing because it's what playwriting is. You're writing dialogue. So I would talk to this child in the dream, who's clearly my inner child. And saying, well, look, how's it going? What's wrong? And, you know, kid, he would be really rude at me. Go away, I don't want to talk to you. And it's like, hey, what's wrong? You know. And so this was my child within, you know, that was clearly not happy. And so the, you know, so the idea is you start to build this dialogue and build this trust up with this inner child who was, you know, I think scared and all sorts of things. And it's amazing because what you're doing there is really, you know, you're connecting with these parts of you. You know, you think you're in touch with yourself, and then you find out there's a little child within you who's clearly not happy, and so you have to feed that child, and you have to sort of say, okay, it's okay, I'll try and, you know. And it turned out the child wanted to just do more fun things because I wasn't doing enough, having enough fun.
Sure.
And so it's like, I'm here as well. Take me out and let's, you know, go whizzing down the hill on the bike or something like that, you know. And and so those things are really important. But yeah, God, how do you find out about these things? I mean, I've been reading psychology and stuff for years, and you don't, you know.
Well, I mean, brother, you were very joyous when we saw you in January as well. And I thought, whatever he's doing, it's really working well for him at this point, you know, and I'd love to pick his brain about it. I mean, I've done a lot of work with the inner child as well. And it's wonderful. You find it, you know, by being open to it, you know, and we don't find these parts of ourselves by living in our head. We really have to make that inner journey. And, you know, you're like pumping the well every day. And so things come up and things come out, even in your dream state, as you say, which, you know, Joe Dispenza is a big name that a lot of people are talking about right now in terms of meditation and consciousness. And there are so many others. Muji, I've been doing his meditation recently, and he's fascinating. Eckhart Tolle, Byron Katie, they're always about, you know, finding that place of the witness within where everything can be tumbling out, you know, where things are not repressed or denied or pushed down or just projected onto others. But yeah, it's like singing a song in a hurricane, you know. It's often quite challenging because there's so much energy there. But when you're meditating or doing music or writing, doing your poetry, doing your jamming and you know, letting it all just flow through you, you know, you're creating that open channel, which is you know, why I love chatting about you with all this.
That's what I think I've discovered with this anima energy as well. The you know, the feminine within the masculine is that, of course, I think I'm I definitely have an issue, I think, of being, I sometimes can be overly critical, and so I think this masculine side can take over sometimes. And it's really interesting that I'm into something like poetry because, of course, and I love nature because that's getting in touch with the feminine aspect. And I think it's always interesting. It's often when I'm not sort of maybe not walking out around nature enough, or I'm not doing creative writing, that can kind of tip that side. And then there's this sort of, then the anima becomes this sort of, there's, I mean, it's fascinating, the whole thing of that. I mean,
Sure.
it appears in so many ways, but I kind of just discovered that recently as well, that kind of, and it's becoming conscious of these patterns, because then what happens, because often what happens is we're not conscious of these patterns, and then suddenly, boom, something happens in your life, and you're like, what the hell happened? Whatever, I don't know, you might, big argument or some kind of, you know what I mean? You're like, well, where did that come from? And I think what I'm trying to do now is be more conscious of when the negative pattern or whatever is starting, you know what I mean? And going, oh, okay, just be, what am I feeling there? It's often a kind of anima thing as well. And of course that's natural in our world, because we haven't over masculinized, everything is to do with, it's a masculine world, getting on, doing better, all those things are very, very masculine. Of course you need that to a certain extent.
Yes.
You also need the feminine side as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're talking about feeding your spirit, and keeping your spirit in good form, in touch with your spirit, and finding the things that raise and feed your spirit to me. And that's I mean, those are the most alive people. People who take that seriously in the best sense of the word, that are committed to that, being in balance with ourselves, looking for harmony within all these changes in life. And let go into the mystery. The feminine is the emotional and the spiritual, and that's where things come up from and bubble up from, etc., etc. But like you say, if we're too rigid, too fixed, too in our heads, too overwhelmed, then we're not going to be listening for that or feeling for that, even that subtle music inside of us.
And that's what this work about Blank is very much about. It's very much about someone who has lost, well, it starts off as someone who's lost their cat, and in dream symbolism the cat stands for the feminine, so this person has lost the feminine aspect of himself, and it's about recovering that. But then it's also about, I mean, what happens with the anima as well is projections, because then you project that onto someone else, but of course the psychological thing to do is go within, and so it's so interesting, because as soon as you realize that, as soon as you give someone that ability to go, no, you don't need to project those things, it's within you, find that, what's going on, the love that you're missing, or they said the flow and all those things, then you get you start to get places a little bit more, perhaps.
You get insight and revelation and healing, and inspiration. The goodies.
But I had no idea about that when I was writing it. Again, I'm still finding out things about it now. So it's a really fascinating. It's a fascinating approach, and it's really interesting. So
brilliant. Well, let's keep it there. That was absolutely gorgeous, because I don't want to run over and be run out of something in the middle of your wisdom here on our recording. Where can people find you if they want to buy your books or follow your work?
So the books should be available. Order them from bookshops, and my publishers are Salmon Poetry, so you can get it from their website. You can get it from Amazon and Waterstones, all those usual channels. And I have a website called adamwyeth.com. I also teach creative writing and do editing work as well. So I do a lot of online teaching, mostly online now. So it's like a correspondence course. So you can find information on that on the website, adamwyeth.com. Send me a message there and I can give you more information and that sort of thing.
Really? Yeah. When does the book get published?
May. It's coming out in May. Yeah, this year. Yeah.
Okay.
About Blank. Yeah, I'm very excited about it. Yeah, it's
I am too. And I'm always thrilled to connect with you, brother. You're just a fount of wisdom. What a mind.
Well, thanks so much. You too, Lou.
Thank you. Well, we'll leave it short because I think we have a little time limit here. And so as I said, go ahead and send me that.
Oh, shall I stop? Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Lou. Okay, I'm stopping video.
You just leave the meeting and it'll stop recording.